Though Hollywood in general is used as a shorthand for the movie-making business, preceding the 1960s, Hollywood was where all the actors, writers, and directors lived. Each producer owned a studio there until the studios were eventually bought up by the big five studios of MGM, Paramount Pictures, Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, and RKO Studios. After a few classics from each studio, the companies got into less than wholesome business practices and left the door wide open to television. In the 1970s, Hollywood was in a bit of a pickle. They had neglected a core audience of teenagers and children as a viable market and had since gone bankrupt. RKO went completely under and left the others as a shell of their former juggernaut selves. The need to adapt gave way to the now famous film brats of Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, George Lucas, and Francis Ford Coppola. They were given a chance as the first generation of movie makers who had grown up with movies. The projects they are now famous for are the movies they were watching when they were young. Gangsters, melodramas, space operas, and sweeping kid-friendly magic, they were all part of their well-known iconography and have given us such gems as The Godfather, Star Wars, Taxi Driver, and Jaws, as well as countless others. I use this as a segue into some of the film styles from the 70s to today. Of the film brats, Martin Scorsese has the most well-defined style and characterized with long, sweeping shots and character-driven stories, but he still gets points for sticking with the story. For instance, in Goodfellas, the main character, Henry Hill, goes through 30 years inside organized crime and shows you what he's thinking.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. To me, being a gangster was better than being president of the United States. It meant being somebody in a neighborhood that was full of nobodies.
This film gave Martin Scorsese his second wind into making classics. Then, in 2006, the film The Departed had an all-star cast, and for the last hour of the runtime, he spent it killing most of them off.
A man makes his own way. No one gives it to you. You have to take it. Non serviam.
Steven Spielberg is probably the most versatile of the brats because he started off directing low-budget horror movies like Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but finally hit the stride in the 80s with Indiana Jones and E.T. More recently, his directing of Schindler's List, Munich, and Lincoln leave him shuffling between his enjoyment of childhood classics and his complete control of serious and straightforward dramas.
Do you know why we're here?
Francis Ford Coppola is one of the most self-aware directors of the group. He knows that what he does best are character studies centered on violence and change of character. With giving us the Godfather movies and reinstituting the belief that a sequel can be necessary, he has a handle on what he does best.
But if Clemenza can figure a way to have a weapon planted there for me, then I'll kill them both.
He also gave us Martin Sheen's stunning performance in Apocalypse Now, but he has had some trouble since capturing the same attention he received in the 1970s. But he has recently produced the adaptation of the controversial novel On the Road for release in 2012.
Come here. Mwah! You're taking this very personal. Tom, this is business, and this man is taking it very, very personal.
It's not personal, Sonny. It's strictly business.
Lastly, we have George Lucas. In terms of his directing profile, his best was Star Wars, but has a good portfolio of writing and producing. His filming styles have been predominantly all about the sweeping sci-fi worlds in his movies, and also gave us the Star Wars movies as well as helping Spielberg with Indiana Jones 3. More recently, he has focused more on writing rather than directing. His company has given us Red Tails, the incredible biography of the Tuskegee Airmen during World War II.
After the 70s revitalized the movie industry with all the gambles Hollywood took with the film brats, they realized that it was worth the risk to continue ambitious projects and give chances to names like James Cameron and Ridley Scott. The 1980s didn't yield as many classics as the 70s, but from the 80s to today, several actors, directors, and filming styles came into prominence.
Bruce Willis wasn't a household name through most of the 1980s, which is hard to believe after his part in Die Hard as the sarcastic and immortal character John McClane.
Sorry, Hans, wrong guess. Would you like to go for double jeopardy where the scores can really change?
Since, Willis has enjoyed dozens of roles, including several sequels to Die Hard, The Sixth Sense, Pulp Fiction, and most recently, Looper.
I was always kind of partial to Roy Rogers, actually. I really like those sequin shirts.
Do you really think you have a chance against us, Mr. Cowboy?
Yippee-ki-yay.
Tom Cruise is a name everyone knows, with one of his first roles being with Patrick Swayze, Ralph Macchio, and Emilio Estevez in The Outsiders, but came into his own degree of fame with Top Gun, followed by Rain Man, and A Few Good Men, all by 1992.
Did you order the code red?
You don't have to answer that question.
I'll answer the question. You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
He has been able to recapture his career that had been relatively quiet through the early 2000s, recently with Mission Impossible 4 and a supporting role in the film adaptation of Rock of Ages.
With our incredibly brief rundown of the 1980s actors and directors, let's get into more obscure film styles and movies. The modern B-movie is pretty well extinct, with the exception of a few experiments here and there, most notably Cabin in the Woods. For those of you who may not know, a B-movie is, in a nutshell, a relatively low-budget movie that usually has a small cast, but the ones that stand out make up for it with interesting characters, well-paced stories, and in horror B-movies, playing to suspense as its strength. Examples include the movies of Sam Raimi as well as the Boondock Saints. Exploitation films were all the rage from the 70s to 80s, when patrons at drive-ins were looking for a different kind of movie. The answer was extremely violent and now barely used subgenre of grindhouse films. The only real examples of grindhouse made today are the select movies made by Robert Rodriguez, who admits to watching plenty of them in his childhood and makes them as a salute to his grindhouse classics. Guy Ritchie has a film style that matches up John Woo's slow motion with a spanning cast of characters all flawed humanly and given conflicting emotions. Much like his counterpart Martin Scorsese, his bread and butter is in crime dramas, but also like Scorsese, he makes it his own with his use of lighting and cuts. Guy Ritchie stormed onto the scene in 1998 with his independent classic, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, which gave blockbuster star Jason Statham his first role. He followed it with Snatch, which continued his set style of a large cast of characters in crime noir. Then he was given a comic book movie, which turned into just a Guy Ritchie movie in 2008 with Rock and Rolla. He spent all of his time since on Sherlock Holmes and Sherlock Holmes 2.
What do you mean you can't get the public planning? You owe me. Right, I get the building, you lose your share, and I'm still out of pocket 2 large ones. Find it.
Lenny controls the councillors, the judges, and the lawyers. No planning permission will be given until Lenny wants it. And now that he owns the building, he wants the permission.
Hello, councillor.
Robert Rodriguez understands that if he's doing a salute to grindhouse movies, he needs to have the effects, but he's smart enough as a director and as a writer to remove what didn't work.
Goldie's dead. I've been framed for murder.
Open up, please.
I'll be right out. Walk down the right back alley in Sin City, and you can find anything.
Like in Machete, he uses heavy aging and projector effects for the flashbacks, but then he proves that just because you're there for blood and guts doesn't mean it can't have a brain. His style may only be regurgitating of 1970s exploitation B-movies, but he presents it in a new and fresh way.
Christopher Nolan, though he's most famous for his work with the Dark Knight trilogy, started out with Memento, which is an independent classic along the lines of surprise-ending thrillers. After his stunning reimagining of Batman in The Dark Knight, with fantastic acting from the late Heath Ledger.
You know, you remind me of my father. I hated my father.
He went to work with Leonardo DiCaprio and Joseph Gordon-Levitt in the mind-bending thriller Inception. Christopher Nolan, much like George Lucas, doesn't have a set style per se, but instead characterizes his movies with high concept ideas and the reaction of his characters, even if his emotional responses can fall flat in times. Some of the greatest movies ever made were made under desperate circumstances. With any luck, the next batch of directors will continue the trend of great movie making.
And Hulk. Smash.